to begin something new. I'm going to call it Monday Morning Musings. And it'll be a sort of a debrief in the wake of the Sunday morning sermon. Hindsight being what it is, I always find that by Monday morning, there are things that I wish I'd said, matters that I wish I'd explained, or things that I'd left out due to time. And so Monday morning musings will fill in some of those gaps and some of those shortfalls, so at least for me, and hopefully maybe for you as well. So last Sunday, the subject was Jesus the King. You know, many historic kings in Christendom were absolute rulers, and that's a lot of power and a lot of authority, dubious power and authority for one person to hold over so many others, potentially. And in order to fortify or to bolster their tenuous position, these guys hijacked an Old Testament concept, and they claimed that their respective thrones were theirs by divine right. The rationale behind the claim was that nobody in a deeply religious society, as it was of old, would dispute their authority if it was believed that God had mandated it to them. So here's the thing, though. Beyond figures like Saul and David in the Old Testament era, claims of specific divine right by kings and their dynasties, well, it was a whole lot of hooey. It was nonsense. It was just a grand hoax. However, there is a bit of sound reasoning at the heart of their hoax. For every successful con has something plausible at its center to build around. You see, if an absolute monarch did genuinely hold his throne by divine right or by divine decree, if he truly had been specifically mandated to be king by no less a figure than God himself, then that king would indeed have a legitimate and justified expectation of complete loyalty, fidelity, and total obedience from the denizens of his kingdom. Such a king would have a natural and an indisputable right to be called all of those things, or to receive all of those things. Well, Jesus is just such a king. He is genuinely enthroned by divine decree. He does have a legitimate and justified expectation of complete loyalty, fidelity, and total obedience from the denizens of his kingdom, from Christians, from men, women, and children like you and I, who claim to be his followers and his disciples. And even though it was predicated on a falsely expropriated principle of divine right, absolute monarchs have always demanded that their people swear fealty to them, which is to say that the people were required to take an official oath of loyalty and allegiance, and then they were expected to live into that oath, or they were expected to enact their loyalty, their allegiance, or their obedience. How much more is Jesus, who is genuine, who is the King of kings and the Lord of lords by divine right, owed by us an oath of fealty or allegiance? How much more are we obliged to live into or to enact such an oath? Not just to say it, but to live it. As per his right, Jesus demands that we turn away from whatever path we're on or whatever way of being we had bought into in the world, and that we become instead totally obedient and completely loyal to him. Alas, because of the modern church's penchant, we've overlooked Jesus as king. We hear little or nothing these days about the kingship or the lordship of Jesus and of lived out fealty or obedience or loyalty. We don't hear anything about an acted allegiance to him as King of kings or Lord of lords, or at least we hear little of it. In recent years, the culturally contaminated species of Christianity that has claimed center stage in North America has quietly dropped all serious mention of the kingship of Jesus Christ. This has led to many deleterious developments in the modern and postmodern Christian movements. Aversion to ethical obligations, cheap grace Christianity, easy believism, no cost to low cost Christianity, therapeutic Christianity, and so many more versions have found their home among believers today. You see, when we lose in our vision sight of Jesus as real king, then discipleship inevitably becomes classified as something that's optional. Whereas when we have a robust vision of Christ as king, lived out or enacted allegiance, loyalty, fidelity, faithfulness, obedience, fealty, these are all the things that we naturally offer him. Mental assent to basic Christian doctrine, which we call orthodoxy, is regarded as essential. but sworn fidelity and embodied or lived out loyalty to Jesus, submission to his lordship or kingship, actually following him, yielding to him, obeying him, serving him as king. What is known as orthopraxy is not treated as essential, but as optional. But it's not optional. It's not. Biblical scholars are well aware of the critical nature of the doctrine of the enthronement of Jesus Christ, but stemming from our taste for cheap, low-cost, low-demand Christianity, there is little or no appetite for Jesus as king. It boils down to the fact that we're comfortable with Christianity that requires little of us, that costs almost nothing, while we're uncomfortable with allegiance to Christ the King that costs us everything. We treat enacted obedience, surrender, and loyalty to Christ as king, compliance with his royal sovereign will as commendable, but not necessary. But is that the way enacted obedience is presented in Scripture? No, it's not. It's simply a remodel that we prefer over the original. You rarely hear anyone speak of the lordship or kingship of Jesus anymore, embracing him as such anymore. I recall when it was common. This is difficult to understand because the true climax of the gospel involves the enthronement of Jesus Christ as an atoning king. But what's happened? Our addiction to cheap grace Christianity draws us towards downplaying all of that. God help us and deliver us. Bring us back to a place where we see Christ as king, where we have a robust vision of him as such, and we begin to practice an enacted loyalty to him, a lived out allegiance, a lived out obedience to him in all things. God, keep us in that direction. God bless you, and hope to speak to you again on another Monday Morning Musings next week.